I was lying on the floor, clutching my fresh spinal incision, while my father gripped my arms and pulled me across the hard tiles. My mother stood by the bedroom door, laughing and telling me to stop dramatic acting, but as my tears fell, I forced a small smile, looked up at their eager faces, and whispered 3 words: "Check your phones." Before I reveal the look on their faces when those screens flashed red, "Stop right here. Drop a comment below with your city and the exact time you're watching this." I reply to as many as I can. Now, brace yourself, because what happened next was the most satisfying karma ever recorded. My name is Rachel, and for 28 years, I believed that family was supposed to be your safe harbor in a cruel world. I was raised to believe that blood bound us together, that no matter how hard life got, your parents and siblings would be the ones standing beside you when the storm hit. Because of that belief, I spent the entirety of my 20s pouring every ounce of my energy into being the perfect, dutiful daughter. While my peers were going on summer vacations, buying luxury clothes, and enjoying weekend getaways, I was working grueling 12-hour shifts as a corporate paralegal at a fast-paced law firm downtown. I squeezed every penny I made. I cooked at home, wore clothes until they frayed, and skipped every night out with friends. Why? Because I wanted a safety net, a guarantee that if life ever threw a curveball at me, I would be standing on solid ground. Over 6 years of relentless overtime and strict budgeting, I managed to save exactly $15,000. It wasn't money meant for a flashy lifestyle. It was stored in a high-yield savings account, locked away strictly as an emergency fund for my future or a medical crisis. My parents, Arthur and Evelyn, knew about every single dollar, but instead of being proud of my discipline, they viewed my hard-earned savings as a community pot, a bank account that existed solely to fix the constant disasters created by my younger brother, Brandon. Brandon was the golden child. In my parents' eyes, he could do no wrong. When he dropped out of his first college after 6 months, Arthur blamed the professors. When he failed out of his second and third colleges, Evelyn claimed the system was rigged against him. When he refused to hold a job for more than 2 weeks because he felt traditional work was beneath him, my parents applauded his ambition to be an entrepreneur. Every single time Brandon had a wild, half-baked startup idea, my parents turned to me. "Rachel, you're the stable one," Arthur would say during Sunday dinners, resting his heavy hands on the table while pushing a plate of food toward me like a bribe. "Your brother just needs a little jump start. Give him $5,000 from your savings for his online sneaker boutique. Family supports family." When the sneaker boutique folded in 2 months with 0 sales, there was no apology. When Brandon decided he wanted to buy high-end servers for a crypto mining venture that collapsed within 30 days, Evelyn guilt-tripped me for hours on the phone, telling me I was selfish for holding on to my money while my brother struggled to find his path. Every single time, I stood my ground and said no. I loved my family, but I refused to burn my hard-earned future to keep Brandon warm. I thought setting boundaries was healthy. I thought Arthur and Evelyn, despite their blatant favoritism, would eventually respect the fact that I had worked myself to the bone for every single cent in my account. I didn't realize how deeply their resentment was festering beneath the surface. I didn't know that in their eyes, a daughter who refused to hand over her money was not a daughter at all, just an obstacle. 4 months ago, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my entire life was ripped apart in a fraction of a second. I was driving home from the office around 8 p.m., my mind drifting to the brief summary reports I had to finish for my law firm the next morning. As I entered an intersection on a green light, a speeding heavy flatbed truck blew straight through a red light. The collision was deafening. The sound of tearing metal and shattering glass echoed through the cabin as the heavy grille of the truck plowed directly into the driver's side of my sedan. My body was hurled violently against the door, the sheer force of the impact snapping one of my vertebrae like a dry twig. When I finally woke up days later, the world was a hazy blur of white fluorescent lights, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the rhythmic, hollow beep of a heart monitor. I was in the orthopedic ICU, strapped flat on my back, unable to feel my legs or move my torso. A heavy neck brace locked my head in place, and a web of IV tubes ran into my arms. The surgeon came in shortly after to break the news. My spine had suffered severe trauma. I had undergone an emergency 5-hour spinal fusion, requiring titanium rods and screws to stabilize my vertebrae. Without months of intensive bed rest and specialized physical therapy, I was facing permanent paralysis. I lay in that sterile hospital bed, terrified, helpless, and in agonizing physical pain. Every time the heavy wooden door to my ICU room clicked open, my heart leaped into my throat, hoping to see my mother's face or my father stepping through with a cup of warm tea. Day after day, the door opened for nurses changing my IV bags. It opened for physical therapists checking my nerve responses. It opened for the hospital cleaning staff, but it never opened for Arthur, Evelyn, or Brandon. During the entire 3 long, agonizing months I spent confined to that hospital bed, learning how to slowly wiggle my toes again, breathing through blinding flare-ups of nerve pain, and managing my own administration paperwork, my family didn't visit me a single time. Not once. When I called my mother from my bedside phone, her voice was clipped, cold, and rushed. "Rachel, you know traffic downtown is terrible," Evelyn snapped over the static-filled line. "And besides, your father gets terrible anxiety around hospital smells. You have doctors taking care of you, don't you? Stop being dramatic and focus on healing. We have our hands full with Brandon's new project right now." I hung up the phone with shaking hands, staring at the blank white ceiling. The physical pain in my spine was unbearable, but the realization settling in my chest was far worse. To my own parents, my near-fatal accident was nothing more than an inconvenience that pulled focus away from their precious son. By the end of my 2nd month in the facility, the emotional numbness had given way to a sharp, analytical focus. I had my laptop brought to my bedside so I could manage my work insurance claims and organize my medical leave. It was during a routine audit of my personal accounts, checking my credit reports to ensure no medical billing errors had occurred, that I stumbled across something that made my blood run dead cold. Listed under my active credit accounts was a $40,000 home equity line of credit taken out 2 years ago. The lender was a local credit union I had never set foot in. My hands trembled on the keyboard as I downloaded the digital application files attached to the account. There, on the final page of the notarized document, was my signature, executed with frightening accuracy. But right below it, listed as the primary mailing address and contact phone number, was my father's personal commercial business office. Arthur had forged my signature to take out a massive fraudulent loan under my credit profile, using the money to bail himself out of a failed commercial property investment he had hidden from everyone. He had stacked a $40,000 debt onto my name, fully confident that I would never check my credit reports closely enough to notice. As I stared at the screen, tears dripping down my face onto the hospital blanket, my eyes caught a second document attached to my medical intake file, a document sent directly from my father's attorney to the hospital's billing department. Arthur had secretly filed a third-party claim, asserting that my car accident was caused by a mechanical defect in my vehicle, attempting to open a massive $250,000 legal insurance payout under my name while instructing the hospital to withhold my medical insurance coverage so he could claim unpaid catastrophic hardship. He had deliberately blocked my health insurance processing, willing to let my hospital bills pile into financial ruin, just so he could pocket a lump sum insurance settlement behind my back. I lay back on my thin hospital pillow, staring at the fluorescent lights. The sadness, the heartbreak, and the lingering desire for my parents' love evaporated completely. In their place, a cold, calculated determination settled deep into my bones. They thought they were dealing with a broken, isolated daughter lying helpless in a hospital gown. They had no idea that they were dealing with a corporate paralegal who knew every single nuance of the law, and I was about to build an airtight cage around every single one of them. Sitting in that sterile hospital room with my laptop balanced on my lap, I didn't scream, and I didn't reach for the phone to confront Arthur. Experience in corporate litigation had taught me one fundamental rule. The moment you confront a fraudster before your trap is fully set, they lie, destroy paper trails, and play the victim. If I wanted absolute justice, I needed an airtight, undeniable dossier of evidence that no smooth-talking lawyer could tear apart. I opened a fresh, encrypted document on my laptop and began my work. My first call wasn't to my family. It was to Marcus, a senior attorney in my law firm's white-collar crime division, who had become a trusted mentor over my 6 years at the firm. I explained everything: the $40,000 forged home equity loan, the fraudulent insurance settlement filing, and the deliberate blocking of my medical coverage. Marcus listened in heavy silence as I walked him through the dates and account numbers. "Rachel," he said, his voice grave over the speakerphone, "this isn't just a bitter family dispute. This is systemic identity theft, grand larceny, and bank fraud. If we take this to the district attorney, your father is looking at federal prison time. Are you absolutely certain you want to go down this road?" I looked down at the long, dark surgical scar running along my leg, then at the empty chairs lining my hospital room where my family should have been sitting. "They made their choice the moment they decided my life was disposable, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I want every single paper trail exposed." Over the next 3 weeks, while the nurses thought I was merely resting or doing light physical therapy exercises, Marcus and I executed a quiet, methodical investigation. Through Marcus, we discovered a key piece of information that completed the puzzle. Brandon's sudden push to open a luxury auto detailing shop wasn't just another random startup idea. Brandon had gone into business with a man named Julian, a slick commercial broker who happened to be an old acquaintance of mine from downtown legal circles. I reached out to Julian directly, offering him a confidential legal review of his pending lease agreements. What Julian didn't know was that I was quietly auditing every financial backing document Brandon had submitted. It turned out Brandon had presented my father's business accounts as his primary financial guarantor. But because Arthur's accounts were already hemorrhaging money from his failed investments, the commercial real estate firm had demanded an immediate, liquid cash deposit of $15,000 to secure the lease. Arthur didn't have $15,000. Brandon didn't have 15 cents. They had spent weeks staring at my high-yield savings account from afar, waiting for the exact moment I was discharged from the hospital so they could corner me, intimidate me in my weakened physical state, and force me to wire the money directly into Julian's escrow account. Julian, realizing the massive fraud and forgery risks involved with Arthur's fake guarantees, agreed to cooperate fully with my legal team. He quietly provided us with copies of all emails, forged financial statements, and text messages where Arthur explicitly promised that my daughter will hand over the $15,000 cash deposit the second she walks out of the hospital. Every single text, every forged signature, and every email went straight into the official folder Marcus was compiling for the County District Attorney's Financial Crimes Division. By the 3rd week of my final rehabilitation month, the lead detective assigned to the case, Detective Vance, personally came to my hospital room in plain clothes. He reviewed the bank statements, the notarized forged equity loan documents, and the documented paper trail connecting Arthur to the fraudulent insurance filings. "Ms. Miller," Detective Vance said, shutting his notepad, "this is one of the most concrete paper trails of intra-family identity theft I've seen in years. We have enough here to secure felony arrest warrants for bank fraud and wire fraud right now, but if we execute them today, your father's legal counsel might claim these were old, resolved family financial arrangements." "What do you need?" I asked. "We need proof of active, ongoing extortion or physical coercion," Detective Vance explained. "If he attempts to force you to transfer funds under duress the moment you leave this hospital, it cements the criminal intent beyond a shadow of a doubt." I looked Detective Vance straight in the eye. My father is picking me up on discharge day. He thinks I'm helpless, broken, and terrified. He will demand that $15,000 before the day is over. Then we set the wire. Vance replied. Together we established a precise legal protocol. Detective Vance coordinated with the state attorney's office to place a temporary freeze order on all of Arthur's connected personal and commercial bank accounts, held in escrow to be triggered remotely the moment the crime occurred. Additionally, Marcus configured a specialized encrypted application on my smartwatch. With a subtle 3-tap gesture on the watch screen, the device would automatically dial directly into Detective Vance's dispatch line, opening a live, high-definition audio feed while recording the surrounding environment in real time. For the final 7 days of my hospital stay, I did my physical therapy exercises with a laser-focused intensity. I pushed through the searing nerve pain in my back, forced myself to walk upright without swaying, and built up every ounce of physical endurance I could muster. On the outside, I maintained the persona of a fragile, weeping victim whenever my mother called to give me brief, cold updates about my discharge time. I let her believe I was terrified, isolated, and completely at their mercy. They thought they were preparing to haul a broken, compliant girl back home to serve as their personal ATM. They had no idea that every step they were about to take was being monitored, logged, and prepared for a court of law. The morning of my discharge, the sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting a cold, pale light across the hospital room. I sat on the edge of the bed in my street clothes, my back supported by a rigid medical brace under my sweater. When the heavy door creaked open, Arthur stepped inside. He didn't carry flowers. He didn't offer a hand to help me stand. He simply stood in the doorway, key fob in hand, and barked, "Get your things. The car is downstairs, and I don't have all day to pay for parking." The ride to his house was suffocatingly quiet. Arthur kept his eyes locked on the highway, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Every time the car hit a bump in the pavement, a sharp spike of agony shot up my spine, but I kept my lips sealed and my breathing even. I didn't ask where we were going, because I already knew. He wasn't taking me home to my apartment. He was driving straight to his house. When we pulled into the driveway, Arthur didn't wait for me. He walked ahead, leaving me to slowly maneuver myself out of the passenger seat and walk up the front steps, leaning heavily on my crutches. The moment I stepped inside the living room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My mother, Evelyn, was sitting at the dining table, sipping her coffee with an air of cold detachment. Brandon was perched on the edge of the sofa, leaning over a sleek leather folder containing the commercial lease documents for his auto detailing shop. Arthur didn't even offer me a chair. He walked up to the table, snatched the lease agreement from Brandon's hands, and slapped it directly against my chest. "We don't have time for small talk, Rachel," Arthur said, his voice flat and uncompromising. "Brandon needs to sign this lease before the real estate office closes at 5 p.m. The deposit is $15,000 cash. You are going to open your banking app right now and wire the full amount into his business account." I looked down at the paper pressed against my sweater, then looked straight into my father's eyes. "No," I said quietly. Evelyn set her coffee cup down on the saucer with a loud clatter. "What did you just say?" she sneered, her eyes narrowing. "I said no," I repeated, my voice steady and firm. "That $15,000 is my entire life savings. I have spent 3 months confined to a hospital bed learning how to walk again. I have tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills arriving next week, and I need every single cent of my savings for my ongoing physical therapy." Arthur's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. He took a heavy step into my personal space, towering over me. "Don't you dare speak to us about your selfish little expenses," he roared, his finger jabbed inches from my nose. "Your brother is trying to build a real future for himself. You work a comfortable desk job. You can earn that money back in a year. You owe this family for everything we've done for you." "I don't owe you anything, Arthur," I said, dropping his name for the very first time in my life, and I am not giving Brandon a single dollar. Hidden under the sleeve of my sweater, I casually crossed my wrists and tapped the face of my smartwatch 3 times in quick succession. The tiny screen gave a subtle, silent vibration. The encrypted link to Detective Vance's dispatch unit was live. Every word spoken in that room was now being recorded and broadcast straight to local law enforcement. Enraged by my refusal, Arthur's composure completely shattered. "You ungrateful little brat," he screamed. He lunged forward, his heavy hands reaching out and grabbing my upper arms with a crushing grip. With a sudden, violent burst of force, he yanked me completely off balance. My crutches flew from my hands, clattering uselessly across the hardwood floor, and my feet slipped out from under me. I slammed down hard onto the cold, unforgiving floorboards. A blinding, agonizing shockwave of pain exploded through my freshly fused vertebrae, radiating down my legs and forcing a sharp, gasping scream from my throat. I rolled onto my side, clutching my lower back, cold sweat instantly breaking out across my forehead as my vision blurred from the sheer agony. Arthur stood over me, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. Evelyn didn't move from her chair. She didn't rush to check if her daughter's spine had re-injured. Instead, she leaned against the doorway, looked down at me writhing on the floor, and let out a cold, mocking laugh. "Oh, stop acting so dramatic, Rachel," Evelyn spat, shaking her head in disgust. "You fall on a rug and act like you're dying. Stop playing the victim and give your father the money." Sitting broken on the hardwood floor, pressing my cheek against the cold wood while my back burned with excruciating surgical tension, the final remnant of my childhood affection died. I slowly pushed myself up onto my elbows, taking deep, measured breaths to master the pain. I looked up at Arthur's sneering face, then at Evelyn's cold eyes, and finally at Brandon, who was staring at his phone, completely indifferent to his sister lying on the floor. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, forced a small, icy smile through my tears, and looked straight into Arthur's eyes. "Check your phones," I whispered. Arthur frowned, his eyebrows knitting together in annoyance. "What are you talking about?" he barked. "Stop talking nonsense and get up." Before he could take another step toward me, 2 loud, jarring emergency alarms sounded simultaneously from Arthur's and Evelyn's smartphones. The harsh, high-pitched alerts echoed off the living room walls, cutting through the silence like a siren. Arthur yanked his phone from his belt, his expression shifting from blind rage to confusion, and then, within seconds, to absolute draining horror. On his screen was an emergency alert from his primary banking application. Every single one of his personal, commercial, and joint business accounts had been placed under an immediate, high-priority federal freeze order. Below it, a push notification from the county sheriff's portal flashed in bold red letters, detailing active felony arrest warrants issued in his name for bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Evelyn gasped loudly, her hands shaking so violently that her phone slipped through her fingers, shattering its screen on the dining room floor. Brandon jumped up from the sofa, his face turning pale as his own device vibrated with a formal notification from his prospective landlord. Julian's commercial real estate firm had officially canceled his lease contract due to invalid guarantors and frozen funds. Before Arthur could speak, the distinct, wailing sound of police sirens echoed down the street. Red and blue lights flashed through the living room blinds, painting the walls in erratic shades of emergency light. The front door was thrown open, and 4 uniformed police officers, flanked by 2 detectives and a pair of paramedics, stepped into the house. Detective Vance walked in first, his eyes sweeping over the scene, my crutches scattered across the floor, Arthur standing over me, and me lying on the hardwood clutching my back. "Arthur Miller," Detective Vance announced, his voice booming through the room as he pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for felony identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and domestic assault." "What?" Arthur screamed, stepping back and raising his hands defensively. "This is a mistake. This is a family matter. My daughter fell. I didn't touch her. She's lying." "We heard the entire broadcast live, Mr. Miller." Detective Vance replied coldly, grabbing Arthur's wrist and snapping the cuffs into place. "Every threat, every demand for money, the sound of her hitting the floor, and your wife laughing. We have it all on an encrypted recording." Evelyn began shrieking, rushing forward to pull the officers off her husband, screaming that I was an ungrateful monster who was destroying our own family. But a female officer immediately intercepted her, placing her under arrest as an accomplice to systemic fraud and obstruction of justice. Brandon stood frozen near the couch, watching in utter shock as his parents were handcuffed right in front of him. "Wait, what about my shop?" he stammered out, looking at Detective Vance with wide, panicked eyes. "What about my deposit?" Detective Vance looked at Brandon with sheer disdain. "There is no shop, son. The accounts backing your business are frozen assets in a federal fraud investigation. If you attempt to access those funds, you'll be joining your parents in a holding cell." The paramedics knelt beside me, carefully sliding a spinal stabilization board underneath my back to ensure my fused vertebrae hadn't suffered severe trauma from the impact. As they gently lifted me onto a gurney, I turned my head to look at my family one last time. Arthur was being led out the front door in handcuffs, his head bowed, dodging the stares of neighbors who had gathered on their lawns to watch the spectacle. Evelyn was weeping hysterically as she was loaded into the back of a second police cruiser. Brandon was left standing alone, in the middle of the empty, quiet living room, staring at his useless lease papers on the table. Over the next 6 months, the legal dominoes fell with absolute, unyielding precision. With the mountain of digital evidence compiled by Marcus and Detective Vance, including the notarized forged equity loan, the paper trail of blocked health insurance filings, and the live audio recording of the assault, Arthur's defense crumbled instantly. Facing overwhelming evidence, he agreed to a plea deal to avoid a prolonged federal trial. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, hit with severe financial restitution orders, and forced to liquidate his remaining commercial properties to pay back the $40,000 equity loan he had forged under my name. Evelyn received 3 years of formal probation, mandatory community service, and a permanent criminal record as an accessory to wire fraud. Without his parents' bank accounts to fund his life or bail him out, Brandon's dream of owning a luxury auto detailing shop vanished into thin air. Unwilling to do real work, he was forced to take a low-wage night shift job just to pay rent on a tiny studio apartment, completely stripped of the unearned luxury he had enjoyed his entire life. As for me, I used every single dollar of my untouched $15,000 savings to cover my remaining physical therapy and medical expenses. I moved into a quiet, sunlit apartment downtown, surrounded by peace, silence, and genuine security. With dedicated physical therapy, my spine fully healed. I walked out of the clinic 6 months later on my own 2 feet, upright, strong, and completely unburdened. I learned a painful lesson on that cold hardwood floor, but it was a lesson that saved my life. Family isn't defined by the blood running through your veins. It's defined by respect, honesty, and love. And for the first time in my entire life, I was finally living on my own terms, entirely free.